I have a selective memory. I admit it. I do. I can remember some things really well. I can remember my sermons. I can remember sermons from 20 years ago. But I cannot remember how to get home from Costco. I will go to the same store 1,000 times, and I drive out of the parking lot. I'm like, right or left? It's really 50-50 shot. And eventually I'll get around, but I think I just got to go somewhere. I got to start driving, and then eventually I kind of figure out where I'm going. My memory could be terrible with certain things. Just terrible. I'll tell you, all year long, Hannah's needed the car in the morning once a week. And sure enough, this week, I get a call from her, hey, where are you? I need the car. It's just like, I've been doing that for the whole stinking year, and then I can forget that. You guys know that, right? Yeah, some of you guys, you go through that, like, how did I forget that? Like, nothing's really changed. I forget that. So forgetting things is bad, but what's worse than forgetting is being forgotten. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about feeling forgotten. So the series is Honest to God. We've been talking about how do we be honest to God? How do we hold on to our faith when we're facing trials? How do we hold on to our faith when we don't understand God? How do we trust a God we don't understand was last week. This week, how do we trust to God? How do we hold on to ourselves when we feel forgotten by God? So to feel forgotten, anytime you've ever been ignored before, not a fun feeling, right? But did you know that it was physically painful to be ignored? So they did some studies. They say that they hooked up the brain, what is it? The brain little plug-in things, technical term. And they're playing games, like these video games, 3 people. And 2 decide to ignore the third. And what they realized is that the things that are firing in the brain are the physical pain areas. So the same areas that trigger physical pain are triggering when you are being ignored. When you're being ignored. Being ignored has detrimental effects. What they've done is they've studied people who are ignored and what they call ostracized over a long period of time. And what they've discovered is that, we have the saying, what doesn't kill me makes me strong. Well, being ignored really doesn't make you stronger. Instead of toughening you up, it weakens you. They see people develop a resignation. They shrivel down if they have long periods of time of being ignored. And that can happen to us when we feel ignored by God, can it? How many of you, when maybe you've had bad news happen, maybe you're in a season of just waiting. Finances aren't there, relationships not there. Maybe you're wanting to take steps forward in your life, and it just feels like it's just waiting and waiting and waiting. And you're like, when is God going to do something? How many of you guys know the feeling of praying for the same thing over and over again, year after year after year, and wondering, where is God in this? It's not even that you get an answer like, this is what God's doing in this situation. It's just silence. How do you hold on to your faith when you feel that way over and over and over again, when you feel so forgotten? So I want you to imagine traveling with me to a remote prison in Uganda. And you visit and you see that there are 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds in this prison. And you realize that those kids were arrested for very minor charges, but because the justice system is backed up, they're not being seen right away. And so weeks are turning to months, months turn to years, and they're just stuck there. This is the feeling of being forgotten. Locked up, imprisoned, nobody knows you're there, and nobody's coming to rescue you. And so for us, we aren't in a physical cell, but we are sometimes forgotten in our own circumstances. And what do we do when we're forgotten in our circumstances? What do you do? What are your strategies when you feel forgotten? Do you just try to ignore it? Do you try to move on? well, that could have detrimental effects to you. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to remember three things. So when we feel forgotten, we got to remember some stuff. Here are three things we got to remember while we're feeling forgotten, okay? First one is I want you to lift up your right hand right now, and face it towards yourself. And I want you to imagine your name engraven into your palm, okay? An engraved palm. That's the first thing I want you to remember is an engraved palm. Here's what it says in Isaiah. This is talking about the time of exile, where the people of Israel feel forgotten. They've been ransacked. They've been captured. Their city is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. They have loved ones who've been killed. They're not in their own hometown. They are pulled away. They feel forgotten. And here's what they're saying. They say, the Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has forgotten me. It's not just us who have felt forgotten by God. Throughout history, the people of God have cried out to God, you have forgotten me. So God replies, he says, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? He says, yeah, there are some relationships where you cannot forget the other person. A mother can't forget their child. And yet he goes on, though she may forget. He says, maybe there's someone here whose own mother has forgotten them. He says, I won't forget you. I won't forget. You think of the one person in the world who won't forget, even if they forget you, I won't forget you. This is the Lord's words to Israel. He says, see, I've engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are ever before me. He says, I didn't just write with a washable marker. I didn't just write your name with a permanent marker. No, I've engraved your names on my hands. He says that to Israel. He says that to Judah, to Zion. Is he saying that to you, though? You know, whenever we read the Bible, we got to be careful to say, like, oh, are these my words to me? And I think this does not apply to you. No, it doesn't apply to you because it's far stronger. If Israel's name is engraven on the hands of the Lord, then what do we have? Well, we have spikes that went through the hands of Jesus, don't we? You know, when Jesus died and resurrected, he came back, and Thomas doubted. Jesus said to him, he said, touch my hands and my feet and feel the sides, feel the scars here. He says, those scars aren't going away. If God is telling Zion, he says, look, your name is engraved on my palms, Jesus will say, look at my scars. You think I'm ever going to forget you? When you feel forgotten, look at your own hands and imagine the scars on Jesus' hands and think, will Jesus even be able to forget me? He can't. He can't. If you had a scar right there on your hand, bright as day, you're not going to forget where it came from. No. So let's remember those engraved palms. Engraved palms. The next thing I want you to remember is filled bottles. Filled bottles. You guys staying hydrated this summer, nice and warm this summer? You got to fill up your bottles. Well, God fills up his bottle, but he doesn't put water in it, strangely enough. Do you know what God puts in his bottle? Any guesses what God would put in his bottle? Well, we'll go to Psalm 58. This is David having a lot of trouble, enemies chasing after him. You yourself have recorded my wanderings. Everybody say wanderings. You put my tears in your bottle. Everyone say bottle. Okay. Are they not in your book? Okay. So, God puts tears in his bottle. Do you know, I had a real awkward experience with this verse this week. At first, it felt really nice and poetic. You know, I've heard it before, vaguely hear this idea of my tears are in God's bottle. Like, That's nice. He cares about when I'm sad. Then I thought about it. I thought, that's not very sanitary. That's actually kind of gross. That's disgusting, actually. I don't know. It makes me think of in high school, there is, at the end of the day, I was in a class where right after school, the wrestling team went to practice, and apparently that was weigh-in day. Do you know what they would do? Do you ever see, you wanted to get your lowest weight so that, they put you in the bracket or whatever? Do you know what they do is they have a bottle, and it wasn't tears, they'd spit in it for the hour or two. And so the spit is filling up. I'm like, that's gross. That's not good. That's probably not healthy. I'm like, putting tears in the bottle, that's kind of gross, God. Is there another way? It's poetic, right? So then I looked it up. I'm like, is it poetic? And so then I looked it up, and as it turned out, there was a tradition where if your husband was off to war, wives would carry the tears in bottles of their husbands. Nah, that was a myth. That didn't actually happen. No, that's never happened. Never. People don't carry tears in bottles. That doesn't happen. It's romantic. It's kind of nice for a second until you really think about it. So why does the psalmist talk about tears in bottles? What's up with that? Well, he talks about wanderings. Where do we wander? We wander in the wilderness. We wander in the desert. What's the most precious thing to you in the wilderness? It's not your sandals or your clothes. It's not your money. It's your water. It's your water. To think of this picture that God is keeping our tears in his bottle, the most precious thing to God, a thing that you would never get caught lost. You would never forget your bottle. He will never forget his bottle. He'll never forget his tears. Ain't that incredible? Every heartache, every pain, every tear, God has close to him that you've ever experienced. He carries your tears in his bottle. Not only that, but we'll learn a little Hebrew today. Wanderings, the word for wanderings. Oh, let's stay on this verse a little bit more. There's still wanderings. Wanderings, the Hebrew word for wanderings is nod, N-O-D. Rhymes with toad. Okay, so say that with me. Nod. That is wanderings. It could also mean misery. Okay, so it could be translated, you yourself have recorded my misery. So wanderings is not a fun thing. It's not fun wandering in the desert. It's not fun waiting for your break to hit, It's not fun wondering if you're going to make it. It's miserable. David's miserable. He's got nod. How many of you guys got some nod in your life? Some wandering, some misery. The Hebrew word for bottle is nod. It's a different word, spelled differently, pronounced exactly the same way. N-O-D, nod. So the writer intentionally uses these two words that sound exactly the same. And so when you look at it, what do wanderings have to do with bottles? Well, the wandering belongs to David. The bottle belongs to God. So David's wanderings is now moving into the possession of God. Your troubles are being taken care of and taken responsibility by God himself. The wanderings are like a chaos and a disorder. It's a wilderness. But the bottle is a container. I love this picture. What's going on? From one note to the next is from chaos to order. From your chaos is being contained by God's own bottle. So when you think of being forgotten, when you think you're left alone to your own chaos and misery, what you can think of is that God is actually taking that and he's putting it into his bottle. At least there's containment to your misery. What is he doing? He's adding meaning to it. When you're in the middle of a season that just feels like it doesn't make any sense, this is totally pointless, the node is put inside a node and is given containment. It's framed in a way. It's organized. It's given meaning. When you think about being forgotten, when it feels as if God is ignoring you, ostracizing you, we think, no, he can't, because there's a scar on his palm. And he can't, because that bottle he's not letting go of. One more thing is unfailing love. It was fun at group this last week. Renee decided to do a whole word study on the word hesed, the word for unfailing love. It shows up hundreds of times throughout the Bible, hesed. And so we're going to bring up another verse on hesed. It says in Psalm 13, "But I have trusted in your hesed," your unfailing love, your steadfast love. Sometimes it's your mercy. "My heart shall rejoice in your salvation." So this is toward the end of the psalm. If you read the first few verses of the psalm, what you would read is that David did not feel very good. In fact, 4 times he says the same question. He says, "How long?" He says, "How long will you forget me? How long will my enemies triumph over me? How long will my heart be in sorrow? How long, how long, how long?" And it's this repetition of how long that's like, it's like your heart racing with anxiety. How long? How long? How long? How long? He's feeling forgotten. And he's crying out to God. He says, "How long?" He says, "How long?" And then he makes some requests to God. He asks God, "Hey, God, will you save me from my enemies?" And then we get this verse. "But I've trusted in your steadfast love." Oh, we're still, yeah. "My heart shall rejoice in your salvation." So earlier in the psalm, his heart was in sorrow. Later in the psalm, his heart is rejoicing. Now, what changed? What changed between the beginning of the psalm and the end of the psalm? How does his heart go from sorrow to rejoicing? How does your heart go from sorrow to rejoicing? Notice that this psalm was in one sitting. So it's not like all his problems went away. What changed was not his circumstances. It was where his eyes were looking. They weren't looking at his enemies for a moment. They're looking at the steadfast love of the Lord. Ain't that crazy? Isn't it crazy how different your mindset, like how powerful our imagination can be? That we can be in the same circumstance. We can have all the same troubles and problems. We can be in the hospital. We can be in debt. We can be kicked out of our house. We can be breaking up. Same terrible, miserable wandering, same desert. And yet our heart can experience radically different things. Our heart can go from sorrow to rejoicing. What's the difference? Is he trusted in your steadfast love? He just remembered, yeah, God loves me. God loves me. And it changed everything for him. Circumstances didn't change. He's still locked up. He's still in danger. His enemies are still going after him. But what changed was he remembered. So we got to remember, man. We got to remember. Think about what remembering might do for you. Think about how, like, if you're shriveled back, what kind of limits that can put on you. It's pretty brilliant that we have the power to break out of that shriveled back, to break out of that, the physical pain receptors of feeling forgotten. We have the power of that. Why? Because we're not forgotten. Why? Because God is there. Even when we feel forgotten, he is relentlessly faithful. And so the difference is we got to recognize it. We got to observe it. We got to convince ourselves of it, that God is still faithful. I'll tell you this week, Ivy was having a rough night this week. And we took her to Wisconsin. We were staying at Hannah's parents. And whenever we take the baby to Hannah's parents, we take full advantage. Anytime we want to get out, I get to sleep in when we're over at Hannah's parents. Well, so she was sleeping in a room by herself right next to their room. And we were downstairs. So if Ivy were crying, we would have no idea. Well, unless she was crying for 2 hours and Hannah's mom had enough. So at midnight, we get a knock on the door. Poor Nancy was like, I've done everything I can possibly think of. And Ivy's so miserable. She's so upset. She's just crying. Hands her to Hannah, and immediately she stops crying. The one thing Nancy didn't try. Well, we had to get some sleep. So I take Ivy. I'm like, I'm going to put her back to bed. I'm going to bring her back up. And I'm like, she's not, we held her, but she's not sleeping. She's not going to get any sleep. So we got to put her back in her bed to sleep. So I said, I'll compromise. How about this? I'll sleep on the bed next to hers. I'll put her in her pack and play, and we'll see what happens. And she just, she's just in the last, month or so started standing and propping herself up. So now she's at a pack and play, and she lifts herself up, and she's just staring me down and crying. Just, Dad, what's wrong with you? You're right there. Why don't you pick me up? And it went on and on and on. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm a terrible person. I'm a terrible dad. I'm a monster for not picking up this poor crying girl. But then in the other back of my head, I'm like, I'm doing the right thing. I think this is what she needs. She's never going to sleep if I'm holding her. I got to just let her cry. Do you know sometimes we're better off if God doesn't intervene? Some of us know the feeling of crying, saying, God, where are you? At one point, the room was so dark, Ivy probably didn't even see me. She didn't know I was even there, and yet I was 2 feet away from her. We can cry and wonder, how long? Where are you, God? Have you hidden your face from me? Have you forgotten me? And every single word out of our mouth, every single heartache we experience, God sees. God hears. He is 2 feet away from you. And he knows that the best thing right now is not to intervene. But we've got to remember that. When we feel forgotten, we got to remember that we're not forgotten. When we feel forgotten, we got to remember that God is faithful, that God is there, that God is doing what's in our best interests. If you survey the Bible, what you'll see is that God doesn't forget us. Nowhere. As far as I know the Bible's pretty big, so maybe I missed it, but I don't see God forgetting anyone's pain, anyone's heartache, anyone's doubt, anyone's anxiety, anyone's questions. God doesn't forget any of it. He doesn't forget it. Do you know what God does forget? He doesn't forget your suffering. He doesn't forget your needs. What does God forget, though? Some of you might know it. The one thing God forgets is your sin. Ain't that nice? And yet, we read in the Bible that God keeps remembering. With Noah, Noah's on the boat. He's on the ark, the flood had come. And God remembers Noah and his family. Israel cries out to God after being in Egypt for 400 years. They're enslaved in Egypt, and they're crying out because the Pharaoh just gets more and more abusive and oppressive, and they cry out to God. And God remembers his people. Logically, if I were to remember something, if you were to say, oh yeah, and then Nick remembered how to get home from Anchor Church, you would think if I said that I would have forgotten, right? When we say we remember, we imply that it had already been forgotten. But that's not what the Bible means when the Bible talks about God remembering. What the Bible is saying every single time you read, and the Lord remembered, and God remembered, and he remembered, and he remembered every single time you look at it, what it's telling us is that God is about to move, that God is about to intervene. He's about to act. So here's what we know. So often we think that God has forgotten us, and we got to know sometimes he doesn't intervene for our good. But then when we see the words, and he remembered, that ought to be music to our ears, because that means he's about to move. He's about to clear out the flood for new land to come. He's about to rescue the enslaved Israelites. He's about to act. When we read, and he remembered, that means, and he's rolling up his sleeves. It's about to get done. It's about to happen. He's going to act. So what is our prayer? Our prayer is to remember that he hasn't forgotten us. But man, some of us, we're saying, God, I think you still need to remember. So we pray this right now. We say, dear Jesus, help us not to forget that we're not forgotten.